Good evening and welcome to TAG Theater in Kreuzberg. I'm Sonja Longolius, the co-director of Literaturhaus Berlin, which is currently on tour through the city. As you might know, the house at Fasanstraße is under constructions at the moment. It is my very, very great pleasure to welcome all of you to the German book premiere of David Soloy's novel Flash, which just received the Booker Prize 2025. Congratulations, David! Woohoo! Well, it's late November and almost the end of the year, and that's often the time when people start to ask me what was my favorite book of the year. And luckily, I put down a list of everything that I read because I don't remember everything. And however, this wouldn't have been necessary for Flash, or as the German title reads, Was nicht gesagt, werden kann, from Klassen Verlag, because once you have read this novel, you won't forget it. So very easy. And I think it is partly due to the rather quiet or almost speechless, yet astonishing protagonist István. And for those of you who have not met István, I'm very, very excited because you will now get to know him a little bit better, and once you read the novel, very well. And it's a very personal way that you will get to know him, because this novel is a literary portrait of a man's life that will stay for you with a very long time. I promise you that. It stayed with me very long. David Soloy will now talk about his memorable protagonist and his impressive novel with the journalist and editor Xenia Sircar, and the German text will be read by the actor Dominikus Weileder. And so please welcome with a warm round of applause this year's Booker Prize winner on the Liebe stage, and enjoy the evening. Have fun.
Welcome to you all. How wonderful that you're all here to meet the author of this astounding book, Flash. Just some information about the schedule. We will be talking a bit about your book. There's Dominikus, who will be reading German parts. There's also David reading one chapter, the beginning of the third chapter in English. And afterwards, there will be enough time for you for questions to David. So prepare. And after that, you're most welcome to buy his book. There's a book stand outside to buy his book, and David will also be signing. So,
yes,
let's go. David, 15 days ago in London, there was this elegant dinner setting, round tables, candlelight, glittering dresses. I think I have this problem with my microphone. No.
Maybe it's me.
No, it's me. No, it's fine. So glittering evening dresses. And you've been announced the winner of this year's Booker Prize.
Yes. Yeah,
What happened then?
I still can hardly believe it. I know, it's incredible. It was, I had been shortlisted for the prize once before in 2016. And on that occasion, I had had a very unenjoyable evening. I'd been very nervous, very stressed out, and the whole thing had just been a really unpleasant experience. And I was very determined, really, that I wouldn't have just exactly the same experience again. So I was determined, that means, to try and enjoy the evening and to just take it for what it was and whatever happened.
You were convincing yourself that you wouldn't win the prize, yes, because also an Hungarian author had won the Nobel Prize.
Well, that helped me, actually. That helped because I wanted to convince myself that I wouldn't win the prize so that I could enjoy the evening and just sort of treat it almost like a normal evening, drink. And although I had a cold, so I wasn't really drinking anyway, but eat the food or whatever. And yes, when Krasznahorkai won the Nobel Prize just 2 or 3 weeks before, that helped me with that, because I thought surely 2 Hungarians can't win major literary awards in 1 year. I mean, that would be totally ridiculous. So, I mean, whatever, it turned out that they could. But it did help me to persuade myself that I wasn't going to win, and I really did do quite a good job of that. I mean, people were amazed that I was eating the food and just sort of talking about, boring small talk to people at the table and stuff.
So how have you been since then? 3 words.
3 words since then. Very, very tired.
You have one left.
Very, very tired. And I've been warned about this actually, because my publisher and in fact my agent, funnily enough, were the same team who represented Samantha Harvey, who won the previous year. So they knew exactly what would happen and how intense that would be for the winner. And so they warned me just in case, in advance of it. And they were absolutely right. It was very intense and it's a bit cruel, actually, because really, after you've been announced as the winner, all you really want to do is go back to your table and now get drunk and, celebrate with the people who've been involved in this with you from the beginning. But they won't let you do that. They take you immediately off, and you have to do interviews with people you don't know, even sort of remote interviews with screens. And then, most cruel of all, there's a live radio interview at 7:30 the next morning.
So you have to get up. I'm working for the radio, so I know.
There's nothing like that to ruin an evening, knowing that you've got to get up at 6:30 to go and do a live radio interview. We went to bed relatively early, and but then the next few days were just sort of relentless interviews, and I mean it's all great, of course, and I will never forget it. But
the prize was announced by the chair of the judging panel, the Irish author Roddy Doyle, and he has won the Booker Prize himself many years ago. And really, at the end, when everything you had your speech, you had the prize. At the end, after the official award ceremony, he gave you this advice. He said, "Say no to everything."
He did. But I mean, he did that on the stage. I mean, we were on the stage, and he said, he stepped forward and sort of took the microphone and said, "I just want to give you one piece of advice. Go home, lock the door, and say no to everything." And that's good advice, I think. But I mean, on the other hand, it's good advice in the sense that that's what you sort of really want to do. But on the other hand, this is a great moment. I don't really want to. I'm very happy to be here.
Did you say no?
To things?
Like the last 2 weeks.
I had to. I mean, I must. This sounds like boasting, but the volume of things is so great that you can't say yes to everything. I mean, I've said no to things I've said no to going to Kerala in January. I mean, I've said no to things which you'd think you'd say yes to, but there's just too much. But this was arranged before. This evening was arranged before, and so I'm very, very touched that you wanted me even before. That means a lot to me.
And when I saw the award ceremony and you won it, you looked a bit startled, and I was like, "Oh my God, he won the prize!" So now the room will be bursting. In your speech, you said Flesh is quite a risky novel. You said it felt risky to you writing it, and it was also risky giving it the English title, Flesh. Mm-hmm. So we won't talk about the German title now, but later. Let's talk about the Flesh being a risky title. Why is it risky, and what does it mean? What connotations are there for us?
I think it felt risky. I mean, it's true that there was considerable debate with my English publisher, my American publisher, and my literary agents and myself about what to call this novel when the novel had been finished and delivered and was being edited, but the title hadn't been finalized. And Flesh had been my working title, but even I myself had thought that probably won't end up being the title because we'll find something more literary, more kind of refined, less Flesh sounds. I mean, I think the reason why people initially didn't the idea of flesh as the title made them nervous and seemed somehow wrong to them was because it feels a bit vulgar. It sounds in English a bit vulgar. It sounds like either some sort of horror thing or some porn thing, or it doesn't sound like.
But it's not meat, huh? It's
important that it's not meat. That is important, and you can't. If the novel was called Meat in English, that would have a very different connotation, because flesh, while it does have this slightly vulgar and tawdry thing going on, also is a word which is slightly old-fashioned. It's
biblical?
Yes, it has biblical overtones and also Shakespearean. It has a kind of literary pedigree as well, which isn't the first thing you think of when you hear it in English, but it is there. Anyway, we decided that the fact that it made everyone a bit nervous as a title, we finally decided that was a good thing, and we should use it for that reason, in fact. So that's what we did.
So let's start exploring the other risky layers of your novel, which is really fascinating. We start with the beginning. I start reading. I get to know there's István. He's 15 years old. He lives in a small town in Hungary in a housing estate. Mm-hmm. These basic informations I get in about 4 sentences. The 5th sentence is about sex. So I hardly know that person, you get straight to the point. How important is sex in this novel?
In the novel?
And for the character?
Well, I think it's very important, obviously. I mean, the sex on the first page is 2 teenage boys talking about it, rather than anything actually happening so soon. But obviously it's very important. I mean, the book is, I wanted to write a book which was about life as a physical experience. And, obviously that doesn't just mean sex at all, but it means that's quite an important aspect of it. And especially when István is a sort of adolescent, 15-year-old boy, these sexual experiences he has at the beginning of the book with a much older woman, a neighbor in the building, he sort of enters a world of sort of intense physical experiences that he didn't really even dream of, I suppose, before that. It sort of starts the whole book off in this very intense, almost overwhelming sense of physical experience and sort of bodily imperative, and it creates that whole framework for the whole book. And so it was very important for that. But beyond that, and later in the book, of course, other sexual experiences and relationships that he has are very important. It's like, I think that often, that perhaps, although a lot of novels and stories in our culture are about sex and involve sex in quite a, prominent way, the sort of the centrality of sexual experiences in our lives, the way that often our lives are kind of, not always of course, but often or sometimes our lives kind of take particular turns because of sexual experiences or relationships which are very sexual. The sort of the centrality of that to the narrative of our lives, if you like, is perhaps left out. The idea of life as a series of rational decisions that we make, that make our lives what they are, I think is a false picture. And that's part of what I was trying to do with writing a book about physicality and about physical experiences, that those rational decisions, if we sort of are aware of them, they're very often just kind of after the fact rationalizations of non-rational decisions, of almost physical reactions.
So let's start with Dominic reading one of the first pieces. István, in the beginning, just to set a framework, in the beginning is a teenager, and then we follow, over 10 chapters, we follow his life in this novel. So it stretches about a span of like 40 years in the end. He will be like
40 or even 50.
50,
40 to 50.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So in the end, he's like 50 or 60. And we get to see him in a wide range of different environments, so this is for now. And we start with the beginning, with the neighbor. You already
Yes.
started alluding it.
Hallo. In der Wohnung gegenüber lebt eine Frau. Kurz nachdem István und seine Mutter in das Gebäude gezogen waren, fragte sie, ob István ihr gelegentlich beim Einkaufen helfen könne. Und was bedeutet das? Fragte István, nachdem seine Mutter dies erzählt hatte. Du begleitest sie in den Supermarkt und hilfst ihr, die Einkäufe nach oben zu tragen. Keine Lust, sagte er. Sie hat uns sehr geholfen, sagte sie. Du hast zugesagt? Ja, habe ich. Wieso? Sie hat uns sehr geholfen, wiederholte seine Mutter. Und ihr Mann hat irgendein Herzproblem. Keine Diskussionen. Seither begleitet er die Frau 1- oder zweimal pro Woche zum Supermarkt und hilft ihr, die Einkäufe nach Hause zu bringen. Nach der Schule, zu Hause angekommen, lässt er den Rucksack fallen und klopft anschließend bei der Nachbarin gegenüber. Die Frau öffnet und bittet ihn kurz zu warten, was er tut. Die Kapuze übergestülpt, Kopfhörer auf den Ohren, den Blick auf den nächstunteren Treppenabsatz gerichtet, wo ein Spalier von Topfblumen neben dem Fenster steht. Das Fenster hat eine ungewöhnliche Höhe. Es endet unterhalb des Absatzes. Gut, sagt die Frau, während sie ihre Wohnungstür zusperrt. Sie trägt jetzt Mantel und Hut und sie steigen gemeinsam die Betonstufen hinab. Ist es kalt draußen? Fragt sie auf der Treppe. Er muss die Kopfhörer abnehmen, um sie hören zu können. Ist es kalt draußen? Wiederholt sie. Ja, sagt er. Sie weichen in Pfützen auf dem unebenen Bürgersteig aus und warten an der Ampel. Nach dem winterlichen Zwielicht ist es im Supermarkt außergewöhnlich hell. Die Frau befreit ihre Haare aus dem Hut und lockert den Schal. Er folgt ihr mit dem Einkaufswagen, während sie die Einkäufe hineinlegt. Sie wechseln kein Wort. Anschließend kehren sie zu ihrem Haus zurück und gehen die Treppen hinauf. Es gibt keinen Fahrstuhl und die Wohnung befindet sich im 4. Stock. Du bist sehr stark, meint sie, als sie die schweren Tüten auf dem Küchentisch abstellt. Er weiß nicht, was er dazu sagen soll. Er nickt nur und sie fragt, ob er Appetit auf Szalay Was habe. Nach dem Einkaufen bietet sie manchmal zu essen an, etwas Süßes wie Szalay Was. Klar, gern, sagt er. Dann nimm Platz, sagt sie. Er setzt sich an den Tisch. Die Szalay Was stehen im Kühlschrank und sie stellt ihm eine große Portion in einem Glasschälchen mit Löffel hin. Danke, sagt er. Während er isst, räumt sie die Einkäufe ein. Er ahnt, dass sie eine Art Zuneigung für ihn empfindet. Einerseits ist das ihm peinlich, andererseits gefällt es ihm irgendwie, obwohl er das Gefühl nicht erwidert. Er empfindet nichts für sie. Sie ist schlicht eine alte Frau, älter als seine Mutter. Für ihn ist es, als würde sie nicht richtig existieren. Wie schmeckt's? Fragt sie, während sie einräumt. Lecker, sagt er. Er isst schnell, teils, weil es köstlich schmeckt, teils, weil er möglichst schnell gehen will. Nachdem er fertig gegessen hat, steht er auf, sein Stuhl quietscht laut über den Fußboden. Dann gehe ich mal, sagt er. Darf ich dich küssen? Fragt sie. Sie steht direkt vor ihm. Die Frage überrumpelt ihn, er ist sprachlos, er weiß nicht mal genau, wie er das verstehen soll. Als er schweigt, küsst sie ihn auf die Lippen, ein Hauch von Kuss. Ihre Lippen berühren sich flüchtig. Entschuldige, sagt sie sofort. Er steht einfach da. Besser, du gehst jetzt, sagt sie. Er geht wortlos und schließt draußen auf dem Treppenabsatz die Tür zur Wohnung seiner Mutter auf. Im Klassenraum sind die Deckenlampen an. Neonröhren in milchigen Kunststoffgehäusen. Darin liegen viele tote Fliegen, verschwommene kleine Gestalten, die er manchmal betrachtet, während der Lehrer redet. Die meisten tun nicht mal so, als würden sie dem Lehrer zuhören, der aus einem Buch vorliest. Allgemein gesprochen haben besser angepasste Individuen höhere Überlebenschancen. Die moderne Evolutionstheorie definiert bessere Anpassung jedoch nicht anhand der Lebenserwartung, sondern auf Grundlage der Reproduktionsrate. Lebt ein Organismus nur halb so lange wie andere seiner Art, hat aber doppelt so viele Nachkommen, dann sind seine Gene häufiger in Erwachsenenpopulationen der nächsten Generation vertreten. Es ist die letzte Stunde des Nachmittags. Anschließend geht er nach Hause. Er nimmt immer 2 Stufen auf einmal, als sie plötzlich vor ihm steht. Eine kleine Plastikkanne in der Hand. Sie gießt die Blumen auf halber Treppe. Seit dem letzten Einkauf im Supermarkt, als sie ihn anschließend geküsst hat, hat er sie nicht mehr gesehen. »Hallo, István«, sagt sie, ohne beim Gießen innezuhalten. »Hallo«, sagt er. Er steht ein paar Stufen tiefer, leise keuchend. Bei ihrem Anblick findet er es noch befremdlicher, sie geküsst zu haben. Sie fragt, ob er sie zum Supermarkt begleiten könne. »Klar«, sagt er. Beim Einkaufen wechseln sie wie üblich kein Wort. Wieder in der Wohnung sagt sie dann, »Bitte entschuldige, was neulich passiert ist.« Er ist erstaunt. Es klingt, als hätte sie ihm etwas angetan. Er dagegen findet, sie seien beide daran beteiligt gewesen. »Schon gut«, sagt er. »Wirklich?«, fragt sie. Er weiß nicht, was er antworten soll. »Hast du es jemandem erzählt?«, fragt sie. »Nein«, sagt er. Er hat es niemandem erzählt. Es gibt niemanden, dem er es erzählen könnte. Und selbst wenn, was hätte er sagen sollen, dass er eine alte und hässliche Frau wie sie geküsst hat? Als sie nach dem nächsten Einkauf fragt, ob er Schomroi Galuschka wolle, zögert er zunächst. Dann sagt er, ja, warum nicht? Sie sagt, er solle sich setzen, stellt dann ein Schälchen samt Löffel und gefaltete Serviette vor ihm auf den Tisch. »Danke«, sagt er. Während er isst, räumt sie die Einkäufe ein. Dann, erwischt nach dem Aufstehen mit der Papierserviette über seine Lippen, sagt sie, »Darf ich?« Was sie meint, ist klar. »Okay«, sagt er nach kurzem Zögern. Er weiß nicht, warum er das sagt. Er scheint es irgendwie zu wollen. Wie beim ersten Mal haucht sie einen Kuss auf seine Lippen. »Danke«, sagt sie, ohne ihn anzuschauen. »Schon gut«, sagt er. Sie wartet mit abgewandtem Blick darauf, dass er geht. Als er begreift, worauf sie wartet, geht er über den Treppenabsatz zur Wohnung seiner Mutter und schließt die Tür auf. Danach küssen sie sich jedes Mal. Es wird zu einem Bestandteil ihrer Tour zum Supermarkt. Sie bietet ihm etwas zu essen an und dann haucht sie ihm einen Kuss auf die Lippen. Und dann geht er.
So the neighbor has the age of his mother. She's 42. She's seducing him. They will be having sex later. Although he feels a kind of disgust in the beginning. This relationship, you already said, it sets a frame. How much is it defining István's life?
Well, I think it defines István's life, quite a lot in various ways. I mean, his sort of initiation into this kind of relationship in these circumstances does set a kind of pattern in a way, which is repeated in a slightly different register, but with a similar overall dynamic later in the book, at least once. And then, of course, things take a turn in this relationship with this older woman where, I mean, first of all, the sort of, even though it's quite a short thing, it only takes a few months, the whole thing, and is quite short on the page. There's quite a lot of emotional change. I mean, there's all kinds of, István, his feelings about this thing go through various extreme transformations in that short time, and the woman's feelings also are revealed to be somewhat different, and they change, somewhat different from what you might have thought, and they also go through changes. And then it culminates in an act of violence, which shapes István's life in a very direct way, forever. And so it's extremely important.
There's this catastrophic event at the end of the first chapter, where István meets, I think I can tell that, huh?
Yes, that's
okay.
Let's do that.
Yes. I really have this problems with spoilers. So, he meets the neighbor's husband outside on the corridor, and somehow the husband falls down the stairs and he dies on the spot. István gets arrested by the police. There's a very interesting point, because we don't know exactly at that point when the neighbor died what happened exactly, but neither does István. He doesn't remember. He doesn't know whether it was an accident. He doesn't know whether he pushed him. So there's this kind of, he doesn't know what's real.
Well, it's more like it's a question of motivation, and it's more like he doesn't know what his motivation was exactly, or he finds it impossible to resolve that question of what his motivation was. I mean, the man dies. On an external view of it, it's an accident, but the police obviously start by treating it as a potentially not an accident, and quite aggressively suggest that perhaps this was a deliberate act of violence. István then gets into a great confusion about his own motivation. But that's very important to the whole book as well, I think, because the whole book is about the difficulty of knowing what exactly is our motivation. And this will perhaps lead us nicely on to discussing the German title of the book, because, yes, there's this sense that there are certain things that we can't know, that are not resolvable entirely in terms of concrete knowledge. And those things also, there's also a sense in which certain things lie outside the realm of what it's possible to say, in the sense that the concrete, anything you can say, you kind of, by saying it, you bring it into the realm of what you concretely know. But when you have difficulty of knowing something, then it's also very difficult to talk about it. And so the book deals with, the question of motivation comes up repeatedly, I think, in the book, in various different contexts. So that's one important area, I'd say, where the truth lies beyond the limits of what can be said.
There are also those moments where, like, when he's grown up and elder, like, he's crying and he doesn't realize it. So he's somehow detached from his emotions.
Yeah, I'm not sure if detached is. He's crying. He cries at the beginning of the book as a teenager, and then obviously much later in the book when genuinely very traumatic things happen to him. I'm not sure how detached he is from his emotions, actually. He doesn't talk about his emotions much, but I'm not sure that
he's having these physical reactions. There are, like, moments where he starts beating up inside or beating the wall, and he doesn't know what's happening.
Yeah. There are very physical reactions where he's, punches the wall or attacks somebody, or indeed saves somebody from being attacked by other people. But that's also an equally physical reaction, unmediated by sort of thinking things through. So yes, he is characterized by these kind of unthought through physical reactions. But I don't think that means he's detached necessarily. I think that wouldn't necessarily say that sort of verbalizing things is the way that you become attached to them. I wouldn't go so far as to say it might almost be the opposite, but I don't think it's necessarily the only way of becoming attached to something. I think that it's true that he doesn't verbalize his emotions that often, and often his emotional reactions are perceived by the reader in non-verbal ways. The reader doesn't he's not explaining or saying his reaction, it's being observed and inferred. But that doesn't mean necessarily that he is detached from them. So I wouldn't necessarily go with that.
Let's look at István when he's a bit older. So the next chapter, we meet István many years later, after the incident, after the husband died. István is elder now, and he's looking for work. He tries all kinds of jobs. He's a drug dealer. He works in a vineyard. There are a few allusions what happened in between those two phases of his life. And from some hints, you get to know that István has been in a young offenders institution.
Yes.
When he got arrested. And living there, he has learned defending himself in a rough environment, so he seems to be quite strong. And so you're showing us different glimpses at different stages of István's
Yes,
life.
absolutely.
You said Flesh is a story collection hiding inside a novel. Why did you prefer telling his story this way?
Yeah, I mean, it is a series of glimpses. Each chapter only takes place over a few weeks or months of his life, and then the gap to the next chapter is usually many years, as you say. I think, I mean, first of all, it was sort of, it was an instinctive thing why I told the story this way. I told it this way because I wanted to tell it this way. That was how it seemed interesting to me.
Also because you have done it before.
Yeah,
in your previous books.
Yes, I mean, in a book I wrote previously called All That Man Is, that uses a similar structure, except that it's 9 stories about 9 different male characters, but each progressively older, so that they, as a whole, make a sort of life arc. Whereas this is all the same character, but the way it's structured, the way it works, is quite similar. It means that you each chapter you begin not quite knowing where you are in István's life and what's going on and where he is. So there's this constant, the information about what's going on arrives through a series of hints and sort of little signs, and it's a sort of way of dealing with exposition in a way, but hopefully in a way which means you almost don't realize that you're getting the information, because it's so woven into a story of what's happening now, and the story of what's happening now often is, it's a day-to-day story about quite ordinary, even mundane happenings and things going on. I mean, in the second chapter, he's just a kind of unemployed 19-year-old, still living with his mother and trying to and he's sort of in love with a girl who works in a bar, and, he's trying to find work, and as you say, he gets involved in some sort of possible drug smuggling thing briefly, but so all this is going on, but then what has happened to him, the important fact about his being in the Young Offenders Institution and how that might have affected him as a person, that all kind of comes in, you infer it as the reader. It's sort of oblique, and I just felt that was a way of making it more impactful in a way. And it was, as I say, it wasn't something that I particularly made a decision about. Always, it was always just, I started each chapter by just trying to find the thing, or not even trying to find, just allowing to come to me the thing which I found most interesting to write about.
So we have this series of snapshots of István's life, and maybe at this point we tell roughly how the story will go, so I get rid of this fear of putting the spoilers.
I think it's quite important. I mean, it's a kind of is a plot-driven book, so I think
it's
important not to know some very significant things that happen. So I thank you for taking such care of it.
Let's see. Now I try to give you the big arc, and I hope it's okay with you. The story follows István, and after he can't find work or love in Hungary, he joins the army. Later, we meet him in London, where he starts working as a bouncer in a strip club, and then some unexpected event promotes him to become a security driver for very rich people. And then after that, he surprisingly steps up to become a member of British high society himself. So at a certain point, he himself is sitting in the back seat of a car driven by someone. And at this point, I should stop.
Yes, I think you probably should.
Maybe just telling you it's not a highly success story in the end. Let me just say that there are so many unexpected turns and twists, and especially from page 280 in the German version, you really, your pulse is speeding up. So if you arrive there, just switch off your phone. I hope you have eaten before, and then it just, the last 100 pages, it's like, wow. But the interesting part is what is written, so the glimpses, and what is not written. So maybe we start with the reading of the beginning of
sure,
chapter 3.
Sure, yeah. And which is actually a very good illustration of this thing that we're talking about, because the previous chapter ended with a suggestion that he might join the army, but then suddenly we jump forward a decade almost, I guess, and yes, I'll read the beginning of the chapter because there would be no further information for you as the reader. There's some sort of hold-up. Every day they expect to fly out, and every day they are told it will be another 24 hours. They're staying in a hotel with a swimming pool. They spend most of the day next to the pool. It's not really hot enough for swimming. It's not quite pool weather. It's like 24 or something. Still, they spend most of the day at the poolside. There isn't anything else to do. The plastic sun loungers next to the pool face those towers, those 3 towers that look like spikes pointing at the sky with a few blue spheres impaled on 2 of them. He opens his eyes and sees them there in the middle distance, pointing at the empty sky. Usually in the afternoon, a sort of light sleep comes. Sounds in a spaceless world take on an abstract quality. Sparrows, a passing helicopter, voices at different distances. Something else, he isn't sure what, sparrows. He opens his eyes and finds things different. The shadows in different places, the quality of the light not quite the same, softer, more opalescent, and part of the pool in the shade, making the water there look flat and deep. You want to have your last swim while the sun still has enough strength to warm you up again afterwards. So at around 4, he stands up and approaches the edge of the pool. For a while, he lingers there with a sad feeling. Then he dives in, and the water sloshes and swallows in the drains at the side. They have these vouchers they can use in the hotel restaurant, which is always a buffet. They eat all their meals there. There's a weird selection of things. What there isn't is alcohol. There isn't any alcohol anywhere. Once or twice they go out into the city. There isn't anything to do there, so they soon return to the hotel. In the evening, there's the sound of the mosques or whatever. They start up all over the place, not at exactly the same time, but sort of overlapping, so that the overall effect is slightly chaotic. There's something about it that he likes, though. The air seems to vibrate. When they stop, it's not all at exactly the same time either. They drop out one by one until there's only one left, and then that one stops too, and it's almost dark. And you can hear the sound of the swifts, the shrieks as they zoom around with what seems like incautious speed in the lingering twilight. Quite often he's sitting outside at that point, smoking a cigarette, with the swifts shrieking in the air around him. They skim the surface of the pool, he notices, taking a drink. It must taste horrible. The water is strongly chlorinated. He stubs out his cigarette in one of the sand-filled ashtrays and takes the lift up to the 4th floor. He and Norby are sharing a room. Most of the prostitutes in Kuwait are from Southeast Asia. At supper on Thursday, word goes round that they'll be flying out tonight. They pack their stuff and wait in the lobby, still half expecting to be told that it was a false alarm. That has already happened twice. Buses arrive, though. There's a murmur of excitement when they see them through the front of the hotel, these 2 white buses with nothing on them to identify whose they are. For quite a long time after that, nothing happens. The buses just wait there, with their Pakistani drivers smoking next to them. Then finally, the major arrives, and they board the buses, which set off through the mild, quiet streets of the city. Facing them from the front, holding on to 2 seats to maintain his balance, the major says that they're on their way to Ali al-Salem. They won't be flying home, though. He tells them that they'll be flying to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. From there, there'll be transport to Tata. I'm sorry, lads, he says, over their disappointed voices. At least we're going home tonight. There's some problem with the plane, though. It doesn't leave until the next morning. They spend the night lying on the floor at Ali al-Salem, using their packs as pillows. There's a table with sandwiches wrapped in plastic, baskets of Mars and Snickers bars, glass bottles of soft drinks, and tokens for the coffee machine. There's also a cigarette machine. Using his last Kuwaiti coins with their Arabic writing and pictures of sailboats, he buys a few packs to take home. It's already mid-morning when they walk across the asphalt to the plane. The plane is painted pale grey and, like the buses, doesn't have any markings on it to show whose it is. It's an American plane, though. They know that. For one thing, there are Americans on it, too. They mostly arrive in the morning, the Americans, looking like they've had a proper night's sleep. They're noisy and high-spirited. "Where are you guys from?" one of them asks. "Hungary," István says. "Oh yeah," the American says. "Yeah," István says. With their heavy packs, they walk across the asphalt to the waiting plane. It's slightly cloudy. When the sunshine filters through, it's soft. If the weather here was always like this, it would be okay. They leave their packs on the asphalt to be loaded and walk up the metal steps. There isn't allocated seating, it's a free-for-all. He sits with Norby and Balázs, and they talk about the night out they're planning to have when they get home. It's something they've been planning for a long time now, something they've sort of promised themselves, this massive night out, their first night home. He sleeps on the plane. He wakes up and looks around. Everything seems exactly the same as it did when he fell asleep. Most of the others are sleeping too. From somewhere there's the sound of music leaking out of headphones. More than half of the window blinds are pulled down, including the one next to him. He lifts it a little. Strong light pushes in so that it's painful, and he slides the blind down again. It's impossible to tell from the quality of the light what time of day it is, wherever they are. It is day, though, and not night, even though it feels like it should be night. They're waiting at the American air base in Germany. The Americans who were on the plane with them have disappeared. It's just them, the Hungarians, about 100 of them, waiting under strip lighting with darkness outside the windows. There aren't enough seats for everyone. Some people are sitting on the floor. The officers went off somewhere as soon as they arrived. They come back later with a trolley with sandwiches on it. The officers don't eat from the trolley themselves. They seem to have eaten already. The men mob the trolley, though. They're very hungry. There wasn't any food on the plane. While they eat, the major tells them that the buses will be there in about 2 hours. They're on their way from Tatar as I speak, he says, and there's an ironic cheer. István, Norby, and Balázs are sitting on the floor with their sandwiches. They're talking again about the night out they're planning. "We need to get some speed or coke or both," István says. "Yeah," Norby says. "Do you know anyone?" István asks. "At Tatar?" "Yeah," István says. "Not really," Norby says. "You?" István asks Balázs. Balázs, eating, shakes his head. The walk from the building to the buses waiting in the darkness outside, their engines shedding a strong smell of diesel, is the first time he has felt real cold in over a year. It's quite a pleasant feeling, the clean sting of it on his face, the unfamiliar sight of his own breath. The light inside the bus is dim orange, almost brown. He takes a window seat a few rows back from the toilet and balls up his jacket to use as a pillow. He wakes from a shallow sleep to find himself looking at a European landscape. Churches with onion domes, wet green fields. It's weird to be back here. Thank you.
So István is coming back from Kuwait, and we get to know that he has been fighting in Iraq.
The situation is it's 2004, and he's returning from the war in Iraq, where, in fact, there were a small number of Hungarian soldiers. And and then the rest of this chapter, that's the first bit of the chapter. The rest of the chapter is about his experience in Iraq, really. But it's told obliquely, latently. He gets back. He is told in terms of just this night out that he and the other soldiers have. It's told in terms of him returning to the town where his mother lives and meeting his mother again after being away for a year or more, trying to find work, and eventually he has a kind of breakdown. He's clearly got something like PTSD, and towards the end of the chapter, he starts seeing a therapist and talking about it. But you never get a direct view of his experience there. It's always seen through the experience of coming home after.
So like this waiting situation, that's quite unusual, because you're reading and then you just find out, oh, he has been fighting somewhere, but you don't show those like action scenes.
Yeah, well, I mean, you sort of hear about them towards the end of the chapter in the context of his discussion with the therapist, but no, and I mean, so this illustrates quite interestingly what I was saying before, that when I started writing this chapter, I knew that it would be about, he's been to Iraq, he's been a soldier there, one of his friends has been killed. I knew that that was the substance of this chapter, but for me, just the instinctive way into it was to start by writing about these young men waiting in Kuwait for the flight home. For some reason, that to me seemed like the most interesting thing to write about. I was doing research, obviously for this part of the book, I had to do a little bit of research about how this was, and one of the things I learned in the research was that Kuwait was the sort of way in and out of Iraq for soldiers who were serving, fighting there. They would always arrive on a plane in Kuwait and then cross the border by land and do reverse when they went home. And something about that, when I discovered that, something about just the sort of ennui and the boredom of waiting in Kuwait to go home at the end of this experience, just that was the thing I wanted to write about, so I did.
So are those everyday situations, let's say maybe the boring situations, more interesting for you?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's sort of superficially, yes, because, you know, it's not, I think ultimately it's just not a cliche. It's when you think about soldiers who have served in a war like the Iraq War, you don't immediately think about them hanging around in a hotel waiting to go home. And it's the fact that it's not a cliche, it's not what people would immediately think about. That's what allows it to become interesting. It allows it to get into their imagination, the reader's imagination, from an unfamiliar angle. Also, it means that at the beginning of the chapter, there are just these young men, István and some other young men, hanging around in some shabby hotel next to a swimming pool. You're not even sure where they are. You don't know, they could be on holiday. You just don't know, in the bit I just read at the beginning there. Which means that you first meet them just as these young men. It's only later that you discover that they have been soldiers. And something about first encountering them as young men and then discovering that they're soldiers, that's quite important. Because I think if you were initially introduced to them from the first moment as soldiers, that would affect how you saw them from the first moment. That would immediately put them in a certain...
Get all the stereotypes?
Yes, exactly. It would immediately, there'd be a question of stereotyping, and also it would affect any reader's response to it. So it's just a way of sort of approaching the reader from an angle which is imaginatively unfamiliar for the reader, so that it's a sort of defamiliarization.
And you work a lot with gaps. So there are those, like, you are skipping the events. I mean, we just talked about it now. You are skipping the events which must have a big impact on his life, on his building his character, like the experience of living in a young offenders institution, like the Iraq fighting in Iraq, getting attacked over there. Later, we don't read about his way deciding to go to London, about starting a new life there. So that's all in the off.
Yes, off stage, as it were. Yeah,
off stage.
Yeah.
István getting married is also
yes, absolutely. That also
not shown.
Yeah.
So the novel, there are many dramatic events, and at the same time, it's not dramatic at all. So it's both. And the reader has to make his own conclusion. It's always filling up those gaps. When did you decide to work with these gaps, and how important are they?
Well, I think, as I say, the similarity with one of my previous books, All the Man Is quite important, because that was a way of writing that used gaps and that used these kind of hiatuses for a sort of in an imaginative way to sort of heighten something. And so that was a habit I was already in.
But now you have one character.
Yes, no, absolutely.
It's a step further.
Yeah,
isn't it?
It is definitely. And But I think really it's just, in a way, it's the same thing, because it's just I wanted to write about the things that I found most interesting and not write about the things that I didn't find interesting. And, you know, a lot of the kind of events that happen to him, which are not shown, and as you say, the reader has to imagine and infer, and I think that sort of involves the reader more actively in a way without them even quite realizing it, perhaps, than if they were just being handed the information. Also, I find I don't like, as a reader myself, I don't like reading novels where it's just kind of blah, 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 you know, it's just sort of, and then where you can already imagine everything and then you're just told the stuff that you can already basically imagine for yourself. So I think it was just a question of wanting to sort of jump over those bits.
But it's also a bit vicious, isn't it?
In what way?
Yeah, because the reader, you're working against the expectations of the reader. You're hooking us always, you know. I think, okay, what did he do now? Where's he now? So
well, I'm sorry if you found it frustrating.
Yeah.
I think it's, I mean, if you found it frustrating in the right way, that's good. If you found it frustrating in a way that made you kind of engaged you with it more and made you more interested, then it's working. Then that's what it's supposed to do. It's kind of like it's the sort of so there's a sense that the thing's constantly moving. The reader's constantly having to feel that they're one pace behind what's happening. I mean, I just like being in that position as a reader myself. I mean, I get bored if I feel that I'm not one pace behind what's happening. You always want to be finding out something surprising, you know, and I guess it's that. It's, you know, it's about always, so there's always something slightly surprising going on.
But working with these gaps, was this part of the risky?
Maybe,
work?
yeah. I mean, I'm not sure actually that I was thinking of the gaps. I mean, I think the gaps, I think the gaps do work in the way that they're supposed to, and
it's a lot of craft also.
Yeah, but it also makes the book. I think that it's not actually such a long book. It's not a very short book, but it's not a very long book. But it feels, I hope,
well, 380 pages. I think the German version. It's not that short.
It's not short, but it's not 1,000 pages, you know. But
okay.
it feels. I mean, I don't like books that are more than 4, maximum 500 pages. But so it is on the long. You know, it's not a sort of slim volume. But on the other hand, I hope it feels longer than it is in a good way, in the sense that I think you perhaps feel like you have been given more of this guy's life than would normally be able to be fitted into 380 pages even, because the gaps are doing so much work in terms of conveying that. I mean, I don't know if you'd agree with that, but I hope that the book gives a feeling that by the time you reach the end of it, there's a sort of a sense of huge sweep, and you know you've had almost half a century of this individual's life, but because so much of it happens in the gaps, which I hope in a way which is still imaginatively compelling, that it sort of it sort of seems it's surprising how short the book is, given how much you feel you know about his life.
So let's get to István, your main character, which is how to say it, fascinating, enigmatic, odd.
I hope so.
You write odd in your books at some point. So Dominic will read us from chapter 5. We find István in London now. He has made his career step from a bouncer in a strip club to a security driver. He lives with this really rich family, the Nymans. Yeah. And he's driving, isn't it? Yeah.
Geht im Battersea-Park laufen. Seine Schritte wirbeln Laub auf, das die Pfade unter den Bäumen streckenweise dicht bedeckt. Kann sich lebhaft daran erinnern, als Kind durch Laub gelaufen zu sein. Durch Schwaden brauner Blätter. Was war daran so schön? Vielleicht die Tatsache, dass das Laub kein Hindernis darstellt, nur raschelte. Ein Hund lässt Tauben aufflattern. Er gehört zu dem Rudel, das sich bildet, wenn die professionellen Dogwalker morgens ihre Runden drehen. Bevor er in diesem Teil Londons lebte, hat er nicht mal geahnt, dass es ein Beruf sein könnte, die Hunde anderer Leute auszuführen. Als er das Haus erreicht, prangt ein großer Schweißfleck vorn auf seinem T-Shirt. Der gepflasterte Vorplatz ist durch einen hohen, mit gewelkten Glycinien bewachsenen Eisenzaun von der Straße getrennt. Er drückt das Tor auf. Der graue Tag spiegelt sich in den Fenstern des Hauses wie in einem Teich. Er benutzt nicht den Haupteingang. Er nimmt die Seitentür. Dort hängt ein diskretes Schild mit der Abbildung einer zeigenden Hand und der Aufschrift Serviceeingang. Dann geht er die Dienstbotentreppe zu seiner kleinen Wohnung unterm Dach hinauf. Er duscht, er rasiert sich, er zieht Anzug und Krawatte an. Es geht auf 9, als er den Mercedes aus der ehemaligen Stallung holt und vorfährt, falls er von Mr. oder Mrs. Newman benötigt wird. Über die Agentur war er regelmäßig für sie tätig. Dann boten sie ihm einen Vollzeitjob als Security Driver an. Mr. Newman ist in den 60ern. Seine Frau ist wesentlich jünger, vermutlich um die 40. Sie scheinen getrennte Leben zu führen. Gemeinsam lassen sie sich so gut wie nie von István fahren. Tatsächlich hält sich Mr. Newman überwiegend im Landhaus in Hertfordshire auf und ist meistens im Hubschrauber unterwegs, sodass Istváns Job fast ausschließlich darin besteht, Mrs. Newman in London herumzufahren. Erzählen Sie von sich, István, fordert sie ihn eines Tages auf. Von mir? Ja. Was möchten Sie wissen? Fragt er. Schlicht etwas mehr über Sie, sagt sie. Er lenkt den Mercedes durch den zäh fließenden Verkehr auf dem Piccadilly. Karl hat erzählt, Sie waren in der Armee, sagt Mrs. Newman. Ja. Und wie war das? Fragt sie. Wie das war? Es geht wieder voran und er muss sich auf den Verkehr konzentrieren. Ja, sagt sie. Es war... Er weiß nicht, was er erzählen soll, welche Antwort sie erwartet. Es war okay, sagt er. Es war okay? Ja. Was soll das heißen, fragt sie. Was das heißen soll? Ja. Das heißt schlicht, es war okay. Was meinen Sie mit okay? Was soll ich mir darunter vorstellen, sagt sie. Die Antwort, es war okay, sagt genau genommen nichts aus, richtig? Ich weiß nicht recht, was Sie wissen wollen, sagt er. Ich möchte wissen, wie es war. Lassen Sie die beschissenen Ausweichmanöver, sagt sie. Sind Sie immer so drauf? Wie drauf? Na, so ausweichend. Ihre Blicke begegnen sich im Rückspiegel. Sie scheint ihn auf den Arm zu nehmen. Also sagt er nichts weiter, lächelt sie nur an. Ein paar Minuten sind sie schweigend unterwegs. Dann fragt sie, offenbar immer noch im Scherz oder halb im Scherz, erkundigt sich Karl nach mir? Nein, sagt er. Nach meinen Aktivitäten? Nein. Mit wem ich mich treffe? Nein. Sie würden mich nicht verraten, richtig? Wenn er das tun würde, meine ich. István erwidert nichts darauf. Ich weiß nicht, ob ich Ihnen vertrauen kann, sagt sie. Natürlich können Sie mir vertrauen. Wissen Sie, es ist genau die Art, wie Sie das da sagen, die mir das Gefühl gibt, dass ich es eben nicht kann. Was sage ich auf welche Art? Natürlich können Sie mir vertrauen, sagt sie, seinen starken Akzent imitierend. Er lacht, obwohl es ihn trifft, wie sie ihn nachäfft. Tatsache ist, dass sie seines Wissens nach nichts tut, was sie vor ihrem Mann verbergen müsse, außer dass sie gelegentlich viel zu viel trinkt, und das wird ihm bekannt sein. Sie zündet sich eine Zigarette an, obwohl sie im Auto eigentlich nicht rauchen soll. Es macht ihn doch nichts aus, fragt sie einen Augenblick später. Er schüttelt nur den Kopf. Am nächsten Tag sagt sie, bitte entschuldigen Sie wegen gestern. Schon in Ordnung, sagt er. Ich war betrunken, sagt sie, macht nichts. Tut mir leid, sagt sie, macht nichts, wiederholt er. Danke für Ihr Verständnis, sagt sie. Sie halten vor einer Ampel in der Park Lane. Er fährt sie zum Lunch mit einer Freundin. Würden Sie sagen, dass Sie unvoreingenommen sind? Fragt sie, als sich das Auto wieder in Bewegung setzt. Unvoreingenommen? Ja, sie zündet sich eine Zigarette an, lässt die Scheibe danach ein Stückchen herunter. Würden Sie das von sich sagen? Ich weiß nicht, sagt er. Ich denke schon, sagt sie. Okay. Als sie das Restaurant erreichen, in dem sie sich mit ihrer Freundin trifft, erkundigt er sich, wie lange es dauern wird. Sie antwortet, das könne sie nicht sagen. Er sucht geraume Zeit nach einem Parkplatz. Die Scheibenwischer sind eingeschaltet. Er betrachtet die nassen Straßen von Covent Garden durch die gepränkelte Scheibe. Er fährt den Mercedes in eine Tiefgarage in der Shelton Street, geht danach zum Pret-A-Manager in der St. Martin's Lane, schüttelt den kleinen Regenschirm aus und studiert das Angebot. Auf einem hohen Hocker am Fenster isst er ein BLT-Sandwich. Anschließend trinkt er in aller Ruhe einen Americano und beobachtet die im Regen vorbeigehenden Passanten. Wegen der vielen Mittagsgäste ist es im Pret sehr laut. Er ist nicht der einzige Anzugträger. Tatsächlich sind es ziemlich viele, wie er feststellt, als er sich umdreht. Das ist ihm sofort nach seiner Ankunft aufgefallen, vor allem im Zentrum Londons, die vielen Männer in Anzug, die Straßen wimmeln von ihnen. Das kannte er nicht. Draußen auf dem Bürgersteig spannt er den Schirm wieder auf. Er weiß nicht, was tun. Er darf sich nicht weit entfernen, obwohl es Stunden dauern kann. Sein Job besteht überwiegend darin, zu warten. Wir sind zusammen zur Schule gegangen, sagt Mrs. Newman, als er sie 1,5 Stunden später aus dem EW abholt. Sie erzählt von der Freundin, mit der sie geluncht hat, offenbar eine Künstlerin. Sie ist wirklich besonders, sagt Mrs. Newman. Ich versuche, eine größere Ausstellung für sie zu organisieren. Verstehe? Sie ist nicht gut darin, sich zu vermarkten. Verstehe? Sie scheint nicht zu begreifen, wie wichtig dieser Aspekt ihrer Arbeit ist. Nein. Jedenfalls suche ich eine gute Ausstellungsmöglichkeit für sie. Okay. Karl kennt die richtigen Leute, Leute mit Geld, die in dergleichen investieren. Sicher. Sie beginnt am Handy zu hantieren, Nachrichten zu schreiben oder so. Er hört das leise Ploppen, während sie mit dem Daumen der Hand tippt, in der sie das Handy hält. Mit der anderen Hand führt sie die Zigarette zum Mund. Sie sagt, sie wolle ihm etwas schenken, um wieder gut zu machen, dass sie neulich so degutant gewesen sei. Degutant, dieses Wort verwendet sie. Er kennt es nicht. Andererseits liegt auf der Hand, was gemeint ist. Schon gut, sagt er. Nein, es ist mir ein Anliegen, sagt sie. Schon gut, wirklich, sagt er. Nehmen Sie es bitte an, sagt sie. Bei Hermes in der Bond Street hält sie ihm eine Krawatte vor die Brust, um zu schauen, ob sie ihm steht. Nein, sagt er. Bitte. Nein, bekräftigt er. Vielen Dank. Er weicht ein Stück Richtung Eingang zurück. Sie verbringt weitere 20 Minuten in dem Geschäft, schaut sich Sachen an, gefolgt von einer Verkäuferin, die Fragen beantwortet und die betreffenden Sachen für den Fall, dass sie gekauft werden, an eine Assistentin weiterreicht. Der in der Nähe des Eingangs wartende István bemerkt, dass die Krawatte, die sie für ihn vorgesehen hat, zu den Sachen zählt, die sie am Ende nimmt. Zurück im Mercedes reicht sie ihm die stabile orangene Verpackung. Sie beugt sich vor und die Verpackung erscheint neben seiner Schulter. Er zögert, bevor er sie nimmt. Während sie ihm die Krawatte hinhält, weiß er für einen Moment nicht, ob er sie nehmen wird oder nicht. Er nimmt sie entgegen. Danke, sagt er. Sie schweigt. Er legt die Verpackung auf den Beifahrersitz und erkundigt sich, wohin es gehen soll. Tatsächlich ist es nicht das erste Geschenk, das sie ihm gemacht hat. Es gab schon andere. Eines Tages, er fährt sie irgendwo hin, bittet sie ihn anzuhalten. Er hält am Straßenrand. Stellen Sie den Motor aus, sagt sie. Er gehorcht. Setzen Sie sich zu mir, sagt sie. Warum? Fragt er. Weil ich es möchte, sagt sie. Er steigt aus und hinten wieder ein. Er findet es befremdlich, hinten zu sitzen, die Welt aus dieser Perspektive zu sehen, den leeren Fahrersitz vor sich zu haben. Ja, sagt er. Sie wissen, dass Sie mich heiß machen, oder? Sagt sie. Ihre Direktheit überrumpelt ihn. Ah ja? Sagt er. Ah ja? Ahmt sie ihn mit Bassstimme nach? Es klingt, als wäre er ein Idiot. Er lächelt sie an. Ja, sagt sie. Okay, sagt er nach längerem Schweigen. Wieso küssen Sie mich nicht? Fragt sie. Ich weiß nicht, ob das eine gute Idee wäre, sagt er. Das ist eine wirklich ärgerliche Antwort. Trotzdem. Sie sitzen ein paar Sekunden da. Tut mir leid, sagt er. Sagen Sie das nicht. Okay, sagen Sie das nicht, wiederholt sie. Okay, fahren Sie mich nach Hause, sagt sie. Okay, sagt er. Auf der Heimfahrt schweigen beide. Nicht lange danach beginnen sie miteinander zu schlafen. Meistens, wenn ihr Mann nicht in London ist.
I've been counting István says 190 times okay in the German version. And sometimes he says, all right. In general, he doesn't talk much.
Fair enough, yeah.
And the novel is full of those dialogues, like okay, 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 all right, which are not telling much.
Or are they?
So this astounding minimalism, this sparse language, it's really, also if I read your earlier books, there is a step further.
Yeah, definitely it is, yeah. I mean, it's partly, obviously it often has quite a humorous, comical effect. I mean, as we heard, I think that some of those dialogues work very well in sort of comic terms. Also, I was kind of going for, I guess, a sort of realism. I mean, you know, the banality of conversations. Often, you know, they really are quite banal, especially if it's two people sitting in a car or, you know, just in a situation like that. It's not like there's a continuous exchange of significant information. It's more just a sort of social. It's more like the words are more like gestures almost, you know, like So I was trying to capture a sort of very real texture of conversation sometimes with them, which is part of a sort of greater commitment to realism in the book, I think. I mean, it's very important for the book's emotional impact that it feels very real, feels very contemporary. I think it was partly also to try and get the kind of some sort of contemporary thing in the language, in the way people spoke. So I think there's...
How do you find those? Like, I mean, how do you craft this dialogues?
I just hear voices in my head. I just hear voices in my head, I think, which in most contexts might not be that healthy, but in writing dialogue is quite helpful.
So you're not observing others?
Well, I am, I think, but that part of it happens without me even really noticing it. You know, it's just you sort of just soak it up, and then you find that it's there later when you need it. So yeah, I mean, but I think also there's, I guess, a kind of behind the apparent non-communication often in those dialogues, there maybe is some, not all the time, but sometimes certainly there is something going on, something more significant going on. I mean, for instance, in the bit we just heard, you know, it's basically a chauffeur and his employer, and there's a sort of tension in the banality, I think, you know, that situation which becomes quite transgressive and quite strange, unusual, certainly. The banality gives it almost an additional tension that I don't think it would have if the dialogue was more florid and sort of less restrained and banal.
István is hardly talking, but he's also hardly thinking. At least you're shutting him off. I mean, we don't get access,
yeah, okay.
Often we don't get access to his inner world. Yeah. I mean, we don't know what
too
he's
much
thinking.
to say never.
Yeah, no.
But maybe by the standards of the protagonists of literary novels, little, yes.
You're really like craving for those bits and pieces.
Yes. What was the question?
Oh, he's not. Is he thinking?
Yes, sure. Of course, he's thinking. I think that it's very important to stress that István comes across as, I mean, you know, at the very least, as a real person, as a person who does have some kind of, does have thoughts and feelings, and, you know, has a subjective experience. I mean, I think the novel wouldn't work if he didn't. It's the way that it gives you that information which is less orthodox, maybe. Because, as you say, you do, as the reader, you do quite often get some kind of access, direct access to István's inner world. It just, in the bit that was just read now, at the beginning of the chapter, he thinks of the way as a child he ran through the leaves, for instance. I mean, that is his inner world. Now, that may not seem like an extremely important piece of information, but it is important, I think, in terms of creating the sense of a person who does have such an inner world. But the book doesn't want to sort of look at István as an inner world, as a disembodied inner world. I think that's the most important aspect of it. It wants to look at István as a body, and all the characters, in fact, but he happens to be the protagonist, as a kind of a living body, experiencing the world as a living body. And obviously we each know from our own subjective experiences that experiencing the world as a living body also involves various non-physical experiences to do with thinking things and feeling things. And István also has those experiences. I think that that's very clear to the reader, and that he has them, that he seems like not just some sort of robot or animal is very important. But the book doesn't want to kind of let that run away with it. It doesn't want him to end up being just a load of thoughts and feelings, which incidentally are somehow attached to this body. It wants him to be a body which has feelings and thinks things, but those feelings and thoughts are intimately connected ultimately to the fact that he is a body and experiencing the world as a body.
So maybe before we start opening up these conversations towards the audience, maybe a last question, shifting the attention to another character which is important, which is the reader, because I have to think about his feelings, and it's not like you're not presenting. I have to read behind those banal dialogues. I have to fill up the gaps. There are there's a blank page at a certain point where there's nothing written on the page, just a little bit. So I'm really working hard as a reader.
But it's fun.
Yeah, it is, definitely. How did you plan this from the beginning?
I mean,
like hooking us up?
It's kind of implied in the. To say I planned it is too much again, but obviously it's implied in the way that I've written this book that the reader will have to imagine quite a lot. You know, the reader will have to take small hints and small bits of information, and of course occasionally directly reported things that provide, I guess, kind of fixed points, but the reader will have to fill in a lot of gaps between these fixed points. And the reader will do that by imagining what's in those gaps, and I hope that will be a kind of involuntary and effortless experience. You know, it will be something the reader just does automatically, because the act of reading always involves that, of course.
Yes.
In any case, in this book, perhaps the gaps of all kinds are slightly wider than in most books.
But I think that's a bit of an understatement.
Understatement.
Because it's really like I haven't read any book like that where you really feel, okay, this is working with me. I mean, 2 weeks afterwards, you're still trying to understand István, trying.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I want you to be still thinking about it 2 weeks afterwards. Absolutely, and but I think that's because, I mean, I personally am very drawn. Look, I think this is partly why poetry as a medium works so well, because poetry works, in most cases, by this kind of quite extreme version of giving you a little bit and making you, or obliging you, to imagine the rest. And it's kind of a similar way of working to that. It's that sort of concision. I mean, I enjoy that as a reader, both of poetry and of sort of prose and narrative. Being given the least possible, which allows you to very vividly imagine everything, or as much as you need to. So yes, as a sort of aesthetic way of working, that's very much to my taste, of course. I mean, that's why I wrote a book like this.
So, are there any questions in the audience? Here. Oh, we have a microphone. And behind there, I saw already a second. So, yeah.
First of all, thanks a lot for this great book. I had a chance to read it in English, and now I've listened to the audiobook, which is also amazing, read by a great actor. I forgot the name.
Yes.
Looking forward to reading the German with my limited knowledge of the language. It's a bit a cheeky question, but I have a professional interest. I was listening to the interview with BBC interview with the Norwegian writer Karl Ove Knausgaard, who mentioned and basically praised the way you write the sex scenes.
Right.
He finds it very, very tough to write about the sex scenes because it's always awkward. And in your case, in this book, they can flow naturally, not awkward. So I was wondering, how do you do that? I also find it to be very, very hard. It always comes out like very forced. It's kind of awkward.
It is hard. I mean, it's notoriously hard.
Thank
I mean, but look, partly I think there's a fundamental problem with it is that, sex is kind of a non-verbal, it's not really primarily a verbal experience. So to sort of put it into words presents a very basic problem. Obviously, I think all writers have struggled with this. I think the writer who helped me the most to sort of imagine how it might be done is Michel Houellebecq, the French writer, who writes about sex in such a matter-of-fact way, and with so kind of little embarrassment, and most importantly of all, perhaps, so little consideration of taste. The idea that you have to forget about good taste, and you can't. And then, I think in this book I just tried to just write as matter-of-factly as possible, just to sort of treat it like any other thing. But of course you can't be, because it's not any other thing. It has resonances and significances that go beyond most other things. So it's tricky. You can also fall into the trap of writing about it matter-of-factly. And I mean, being unintentionally comical is one of the great dangers of it, of course. And you could also, it's difficult, yes.
There is a small comment. There is even
Well, no one can hear you, so you have to make it short because there's no one.
Yeah, of course. There is even a prize for bad sex scenes in literature, and you were right to say that it's very easy to make it very funny.
That prize no longer exists, but for a while it was got a lot of publicity, but with good reason.
Okay, thank you. I have to admit at the beginning that I'm basically the same age as you are, and I'm also Hungarian. And this plays a role in my question, because I think we have some very shared experiences. I have to congratulate you on the book, because you have a very good feeling of writing, describing places, describing objects, describing atmospheres. So I basically felt very much at home at the neighbor's apartment, the decorations, these plants, and the staircase. I almost felt like smelling the place and the food and everything. So that was incredible. But also what I thought is, because in articles about your book, people mostly talk about masculinity, and basically they talk a lot about money and class. My question would be is, for me, a very important layer in this book was this experience of post-communism. My life was completely defined by 1989. And this was really a society in turmoil, and what happened in the 90s and the 0 years, so before getting into the European Union. And sex was an extremely central part of it, of all that experience. So so sex basically flooding Eastern Europe and Hungary. Hungary was already sexually very liberal before that. But also this experience, for example, the cousin he's in love with, the girl who works at the bar, and ends up with a third-rate English manager from the tobacco factory. And that felt very, very real, because all these fantastic women ending up in very, very imbalanced relationships at that time. So was it also which you wanted to write about, or was it unconscious? Because you could have been from Finland or Portugal, so this boy might have been in Portugal too.
No, I think it's significant. I mean, I grew up in England, as you probably know, and I mean, I didn't grow up in Hungary. So but I visited Hungary as a child and as a teenager and into, when I was a young adult. I mean, I've been visiting Hungary continuously since the 1970s. And I have Hungarian relatives, and so I have more of a feel for Hungary than most outsiders would probably. But it was an important part for me of the book. I didn't want to sort of overemphasize it because I think it's not the most important thing necessarily, or it's not essential. But yes, the fact that he comes from this sort of post-communist society, the relationship between the post-communist societies of Eastern Europe and the western half of the continent is a very fascinating, ongoing story, which is one of the central stories going on a kind of bigger scale in contemporary Europe. And I didn't want my book to be primarily about that, but I wanted that to be present in the book, and so I'm very glad that you feel that I got the sort of the atmosphere of it right. That was important. I mean, when I first wrote the book, I asked Hungarian friends to read it before it was published, just to make sure, because I wanted to be sure that I had captured that atmosphere in a way that they felt was real, and they said yes. So I was very happy. Yeah, thank you.
I have two more questions.
Two more questions? Okay.
Why did you decide to make your protagonist Hungarian instead of a native English speaker? And as a follow-up, is István an evolution of your earlier character, Paul Rainey?
Yeah. I mean, István isn't really an evolution of Paul Rainey. Paul Rainey is the protagonist of a book of mine called London in the Southeast. Paul Rainey is an English telephone salesman. I mean, what István and Paul Rainey and many of my characters have in common is that they aren't obviously sympathetic people. And it's part of, I always find it a challenge to try and engage the reader's sympathy for characters who are superficially not very sympathetic, or who don't themselves try very hard to get the reader's sympathy. So István and Paul Rainey definitely have that in common. In terms of making István Hungarian specifically, that was quite an important thing for me when I started writing the book, because I really wanted to write a book that had both a Hungarian and an English aspect to it. As I said, I grew up in England and lived there for the early part of my adult life, but I then moved to Hungary, and by the time I started writing this book, I'd been living in Hungary for some years, and having not grown up there, and I will always feel a bit like a foreigner in Hungary, but I also by that stage felt a bit that I'd lost touch with London and England, as you do if you don't live in a place for some years. So I had this feeling that I wasn't entirely at home or comfortable in either place, and I wanted to write a book that somehow used that feeling, but also was about both places and about a character who was somehow stretched between the two places. So the fact that István was Hungarian was really part of the concept for me from the very beginning.
One last question?
Yeah, talking about the gaps, you were a lot of talking about the gaps, and I'm interested in your writing procedure. Like, have you written some piece and bits in between, and then one day decided, okay, let's get rid of this one, that one, so it became a puzzle?
Well, there were 2 chapters that were cut in their entirety, yes. So obviously those cuts increased the size of the gaps in question. But generally speaking, no, not so much. I mean, it wasn't a matter of writing and cutting. I just, again, I mean, I keep saying this, but it was just a very instinctive and sort of rationalized thing of just, I did conceive the book in terms of chapters that were almost self-contained units. And I wrote them like that too. So each chapter was written, and then I would move on to the next one, and then the next one, and then I would kind of go back and look at them all. But so it was just there from the beginning as well, this sense that the book consisted of these individual units, these individual chapters, and that there would be these gaps between them. was just part of how it was conceived from the beginning, and yeah, I can't really finally explain why I did it like that, and I just hope that it works for the reader.
Oh, we talked a lot about what cannot be said,
Absolutely.
about was nicht gesagt werden kann, which feels a bit paradoxical, talking about those things.
Absolutely, it is. It's difficult.
But I hope you enjoyed it. So let's meet outside at the book stand if you want David to sign some books.
I'll be very happy to.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, everybody from TAG Theatre. And thank you, David,
Thank you.
for taking the risk of writing this novel and handing it over to us readers.
Thank you very
fulfill
much.
it.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.